Upfront Books presents A Mother's Rule of Life: How to Bring Order to Your Home and Peace to Your Soul. Written by Pierlot and narrated by Kimberly Loftus. With your purchase of this audiobook, you have received a PDF that contains examples of schedules and routines that the author recommends and discusses within the book, as well as an appendix which includes a list of the rules of life. Introduction. What does it mean to seek Christian perfection? A long time ago, I thought it meant perfect behavior. That if I just did what I was told, strictly followed all the rules, fervently prayed all the prayers, and spent a lot of time on aching knees in a quiet chapel somewhere, then I'd be perfect. I'd deserve heaven, really, because I was so good. But the Pharisees thought this too, and Jesus had some harsh words for those who merely conform to a set of external regulations and religious practices. No. Christian perfection is not about outward adherence to certain norms and laws. This has its place within the Christian life, and even an important place, but it's not the heart of perfection. Later, I developed a totally new concept of Christian perfection. It meant being a saint, someone who was engulfed in ecstasies, levitating high above the ground during prayer, receiving regular visions and apparitions. I was disappointed, finally, to learn this isn't the normal Christian calling. Such experiences are extraordinary phenomena, determined by God, and given to select people at select times and places. So, no. Christian perfection is not about out-of-the-ordinary mystical experiences, although it can include these. At another point, I thought Christian perfection meant being a nun, and so one day I shut the book The Interior Castle by Saint Teresa of Avila, and I left it closed for a number of years, because her life and my life didn't have much in common. To be a wife and mother didn't seem synonymous with the holiness I was reading about there. But somewhere along the way, I realized Christian perfection had to mean something else. It had to be something just anybody could do, because Jesus said you must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And he addressed this to all of us. In my study, I came across a definition of perfection that finally made sense to me. Perfection is union with God, which is possible in this world consisting in and proportional to the degree of charity possessed and exercised. When a person loves God with his whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, and his neighbor as himself for God's sake, then he is perfect. To seek perfection in this life is really to seek union with God through love. Thus, Christian perfection can truly be the goal of every Christian life, not reserved to a few, nor tied up with an unrealistic view of what it means to be a saint. It doesn't mean you have to be a nun or a priest, a founder of some great congregation, or a silent contemplative in a hidden mountain retreat house. You don't have to be a miracle worker or someone in the public eye. Perfection is for all of us, even for busy mothers stuck inside four walls, because all of us are called to love. We are all called to be saints, although we are not all called to be canonized. We are all called to holiness, which is nothing more than the perfection of love within us. And as mothers, there are lots of people we can love. We don't have to wait until we get to heaven to be united with God. Although eternity in heaven is the fulfillment of our Christian life, that life is meant to be a process of steady growth in relationship with God. We're meant to know Him now, to be in contact with him now, not at some point after purgatory. This goes for mothers, too. There isn't something inherent in our vocation that excludes us from a deep, intimate relationship with God. In fact, it's really quite the opposite. Since our lives as wives and mothers are a true vocation, a calling from God to us, God must want us to find Him within our family life. So, although all is grace, a free gift of God, there is still much we can do to seek Christian perfection, no less than religious and priests and saints of the past and present. We can make ourselves available to God as best we can, to find ways to foster and dispose ourselves to God's presence in our lives right now, amid the diapers, the bills, and the stomach flu. And this is the purpose of a mother's rule of life. Chapter 1. I reach the breaking point. It was Saturday, January 1st of the year 2000. While the rest of the world was celebrating the dawn of the new millennium, I was pounding the kitchen table with my fist and issuing an ultimatum to my husband, Philip. We are sending the children to school on Monday. I had made up my mind. I just couldn't take it any longer, and he was not going to stop me. We had been homeschooling for about 4 years, but things had gotten harder recently, and I was discouraged. In the last few months, since the newest baby had arrived, I felt increasingly overwhelmed by my responsibilities, and I had neither the time nor the energy to meet all the demands. I had a daughter in 4th grade, Anna, who was just at the point where the whole world was opening up to her. I wanted to walk that journey with her and experience the wonder and the joy of the horizons of knowledge. I had a 6-year-old son, Nicholas, who was learning to read, and I wanted to be able to cuddle up with him in a big comfy chair to read and talk. My 4-year-old daughter, Jessica, needed me to teach her patiently how to tie her shoes. And my feisty 2-year-old son Luke just needed Mummy to crawl down on the floor with him, to tickle and roughhouse before giving him a tender hug and kiss. And I wanted to simply snuggle in silence with 4-month-old Virginia, my love baby, who always smiled and cooed in my presence. My heart was yearning to spend personal time with each of my children, but somehow I wasn't able to. My home seemed to be always in a shambles, the housework piling up and never ending. If I did a major clean, the house seemed to be a mess again before supper time. If I spent time with one child, it seemed as if all the others needed my attention at the same moment. I felt as if I had 3 full-time jobs, my mothering, my housework, and my homeschooling. 3 full-time jobs, each impossible for me to accomplish. On top of this, we were constantly low on funds. Our family of 7 was trying to live on my husband's modest teaching salary. It was customary for me to wait 5 or 6 months to make the most mundane purchases. Our van had broken down, and I was looking at another long, cold Canadian winter, unable to get out of the house to visit friends or take a break with the kids. I felt very alone. Philip was out all day at work, and I missed him. Day after day, I'd watch the clock, timing his arrival home and battling unreasonable feelings of resentment if he was the least bit late. During the day, most people on our street were at work or school or out and about, so there was no neighbor I could pop over to see, especially with 5 children. We didn't have mail delivery, so there wasn't even a postman to talk to. And to top it all off, I had no babysitter at that time. Yes, the outlook was pretty dismal. I remember walking around the kitchen, day after day, saying things like, if I could just get someone to come in and help me get the house cleaned. If I could just get someone to come and watch the kids for a few hours so I could get the upstairs in order. If I could just buy more ready-made foods to cut back on my hours in the kitchen. Maybe if I just went back to work. These thoughts were constantly on my mind. I felt as if I was in a maze with high brick walls. I was running frantically down this passage and that, looking for a solution to even one of the difficulties, but turning corner after corner, I'd only run into another brick wall. I couldn't see a way out of the maze or over the walls. I blamed homeschooling for this impossible state, and the only real solution I could see was to send the children to school. But it would have to be a secular school. There are no Catholic schools on Prince Edward Island where we live. And this went against every conviction I had about the importance of a Christian education. I wasn't in the habit of dismissing my convictions, but I had reached my breaking point. Hence the reason I sat at the table that first Saturday of the new millennium, pounding my fist and issuing my ultimatum to my husband. Nothing was going to stop me in this, I said. Not Philip, not even God. Philip sat calmly, in a state of controlled shock, I think, and said ever so gently, "Okay, we can send the children to school if you want, but I think you need to take a little time to consider whether this is best for our family." No, I don't want to reconsider. I've had it," I hollered. I have to hand it to Philip and the Holy Spirit at that moment, for they nonetheless both convinced me to postpone the decision for 1 week. Philip suggested that I take the week and bring it all to prayer, to see what God had to say to me. I very reluctantly agreed, although I was convinced there could be no change, since I had already been praying for ages and nothing had changed. And so I began to pray, or should I say, to be slightly open to whatever it was the Lord wanted to show me. And on Tuesday, in a certain scripture passage, Jesus spoke to me. Or you might say he smacked me right across the head with a wet fish. As he went ashore, he saw a great throng, and he had compassion on them, and healed their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a lonely place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, and blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds, and they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over, and those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Here were the disciples, staring at a large crowd, seeing all the needs of the people, and knowing full well they couldn't meet those needs. The only solution they saw was to send the people away. And here I was, seeing the many tasks and needs of my home, for my children, my husband, homeschooling, not to mention myself. And the only solution I could see was to send the children away. But when the disciples brought their concerns to Jesus, Jesus told them to feed the crowds themselves. The disciples must have been totally astonished, realizing the impossibility of the task before them. I too had realized the impossibility of the task. But Jesus wanted me to do it anyway. And then it dawned on me. It wasn't the apostles' meager 5 loaves and 2 fish that fed the crowds, but their offering combined with the blessing of Jesus. And Jesus was telling me to give him my 5 loaves and 2 fish, my insignificant efforts, and he would bless them, and the needs of my family would be met. I was flying high at that moment, convinced again of my ability, united with grace, to meet the challenges of being home with my 5 children and homeschooling. A very real change took place in my heart that day, and I launched myself back into it with a new attitude. Now, I thought, everything would be okay. But it wasn't. A few months passed and the situation didn't change. I still felt overwhelmed by my responsibilities. I still felt I didn't have time to devote to homeschooling as fully as I wanted to. My house was still a mess. We still had no money. Things were just as impossible as they had been before. I was perplexed. Jesus, you told me you'd bless my efforts. I struggled with disillusionment, and I felt lied to by the Lord. I knew this was impossible, but I was blind. I was becoming discouraged again. Jesus, why aren't you helping me? Confronted with order. Now it was the month of May, and time for the annual homeschooling conference near my home on Prince Edward Island, where I was scheduled to speak on the topic of babies, toddlers, and homeschooling. I had a carefully prepared talk written out, which I naturally forgot to bring with me. And as I sat through the morning sessions, my heart grew heavier. Who am I to stand up there and tell anybody anything about homeschooling? I, who am failing so completely at it. What could I possibly say? I dismissed as meaningless those points I could remember from my carefully prepared talk as meaningless. All logical counsels and practical hints, but advice that didn't really answer the question. That didn't answer my question. And so, when the time came for me to speak, I stood before the people present and announced with my opening words, I come before you a failure. And I proceeded to tell them all the difficulties I had been experiencing, all the doubts and disillusionment. As I looked out over the small sea of faces, I found frowns of puzzlement on the faces of some women, those who didn't share what I was going through. But on the faces of others, I saw a nodding agreement, a deeply touching sign of sharing my experience, and I even saw a few tears in the corners of some eyes. I saw women who knew the struggles and the suffering, and I saw them soothed and consoled by the very simple knowledge that they were not the only ones, that someone intimately understood their plight. I wrapped it up by saying, and so the Lord has promised he will bless my efforts, and I guess I stand before you now, just waiting for him to do so. I returned quietly to my seat. Then it was time for the next speaker. Alice got up there, bubbling with excitement and energy. Energy I hadn't felt in years and was sure I'd never get back. I was immediately suspicious. She began her bubbly presentation by talking about the joys of home management based on the something called the Managers of Their Homes, MOTH program. She seemed to have it all together. The only thing she couldn't quite find the time to do, she said, was to dust the top of the piano. The audience members sat there with their jaws dropped in disbelief and astonishment. I spent half of her talk sitting there, trying to discredit her, She must not have many children, I thought. Well, no, she had 4. Her children must all be older than mine, I countered. Well, no, I discovered. Her children were approximately the same ages as mine. This program must be really new, and she's still in the honeymoon stage, I argued. Well, no. She had been successfully following it for more than 3 months, which was quite a feat in my estimation. Every one of my attempts to discredit her in my own mind was shot down. And so I settled in to listen reluctantly to what she had to say. She talked next about schedules. Oh, here we go. I had already tried schedule after schedule, and they fell through every single time. Besides which, I wasn't a schedule-type person. I didn't want to live every day the same, or I'd go nuts. The Moth program did, however, have an interesting twist that I had never thought of before. I had always scheduled myself and the children into the same activities. So all of us would do house cleaning together, or recess, or story time, or whatever. But the Moth program scheduled each person of the family separately, so that each person might be doing something very different in the same time frame, and worked out these individual schedules in harmony with each of the others. Now here was a new, unique, and creative idea. But no, I still wasn't interested, for down in my heart, my level of discouragement told me it would never work, and I didn't have any energy left to try something new anyway. The following day, on a Sunday afternoon, I was sitting in my chair in the living room, frustrated again. The kids were all around me, each clamoring for my attention. Mummy, can you play cards with me? No, I want her to play with me. Mummy, you told me you'd read this story. Mummy, can we go visit someone instead? In addition, the entire house was decked in the decorating style I called early colonial chaos. Socks, shoes, blankets, toys, books, papers, pillows, and cat fluff graced the living room floor. Food-caked dishes from the night before were piled high in the sink beside the breakfast dishes. Laundry formed a voluminous mountain in the bathroom. And the bedrooms, well, I had just closed my eyes when I came downstairs. I might not like schedules, I thought to myself then, but I certainly can't stand this either. I reasoned, if God has given me a job to do, and He is a God of order, and if a schedule helps to bring about order, and my present ways aren't working, then perhaps I should think about a schedule. Old objections reappeared in my mind. I'm too spontaneous to be limited by a schedule, I thought. Schedules are so limiting. But this time I had a response. Schedules might be limiting, I countered, but disorder is more limiting. My cherished spontaneity was pointless when I didn't have the time or energy to enjoy it. I was resolved to bring order where there had been chaos, and if it took a schedule, then so be it. A complete commitment to my state of life. By Sunday night, I was ready. I had assessed what I needed. I had assessed what the kids needed. I had assessed what the house, my husband, and the cats needed. It was confusing, and more than a little daunting. But, on Monday, I began the implementation of a very basic schedule that tried to cover the major needs. Wham! It worked. On day 1. By noon that first day, the laundry had been done and put back in the drawers. All the kids' schoolwork was finished, And the house hadn't been demolished because they'd been constructively engaged in other things. And the toddler hadn't cried from lack of attention all morning. By supper time that first day, the house was still clean. In fact, cleaner. 5-year-old Jessica had mopped the living room, the hall, and the classroom. 6-year-old Nikki had shaken the mats in the entry, swept, and put the mats back. 8-year-old Anna had baked muffins for the next 2 days' breakfasts. In addition, the kids had enjoyed half an hour of quiet reading time, played on the computer, built numerous Lego creations, spent an hour outside, and each produced a work of art. And they'd topped it off with a well-deserved Magic School Bus video. It's science, you know. By bedtime, children, house, and Mummy were all clean and happy. Imagine! But the clincher was, and remember, I like to be spontaneous and free. The clincher was when I found that I had hours throughout the day to spend thinking and planning my new schedule. Hours that were going to be a constant in my life. Hours a day to rest, or develop my home business, or clean an attic, or plant a garden, or to cuddle kids, or to be spontaneous. At prayer that evening, it dawned on me. The answer to my perplexity about why Jesus had not helped me as he'd promised. I understood that Jesus is perfectly willing to bless my efforts. But first he had to have efforts to bless. I had to do all in my power to fulfill my obligations. I had to give a full 5 loaves and 2 fish. Not 3 loaves, not 2 loaves. I had to apply all of me to the task and mission I was called to be and do. Not haphazardly, but fully, methodically, completely. Jesus was asking for the dedication of my entire self to my vocation. I understood that this dedication went beyond just my housework and could not be limited to home management. What Jesus wanted from me was to pull together all I had learned from him and from my study about what it means to be a Christian and a woman, a wife and a mother, and a member of the church and of society. He wanted me to analyze my vocation, to see what he was calling me to do, and then to implement it in my life. He was talking about a rule of life that goes far beyond a housekeeping schedule. Nothing short of a complete and proper ordering of every aspect of my life. I knew then what Jesus wanted, but I had no idea where it would take me. Chapter 2. A Rule of Life. A complete and proper ordering of my whole life? That's a tall order. Just how was I to go about it? I found my answer in the concept of a rule of life. A rule of life is a traditional Christian tool for ordering one's vocation. Found most often in religious community life, a rule can also be used by lay people, whose state in life is no less a calling from God. It consists primarily in the examination of one's vocation and the duties it entails, and the development of a schedule for fulfilling these responsibilities in a consistent and orderly way. When a woman has been called to become a nun, in addition to taking vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, she agrees to follow the rule of the community. There are set norms and routines for community and private prayer, meals, chores, recreation, dress, house rules, and the exercise of the specific apostolate of the order. These are all essential to the smooth flow of daily life. It simply wouldn't do to have nuns.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?